Hello and Grüß Gott. On this video, we're going to be replacing our steering rack boots on our 1997 Toyota 4Runner. It's the two-wheel drive version, so it only has rear-wheel drive, in other words. And these are genuine Toyota parts, Toyota part number 45535-35030. And these are actually available on Amazon of all places. Kind of surprising. Should always work safe. Wear your safety glasses while you're working. So with that said, we're going to get started here in just a second. Okay, I'm on the passenger side right now, and we're going to take off this castle nut that goes to this tie rod lower ball joint. And I've already pre-treated it with some lubricant that will help me get it loose easily. And then we're going to take loose this nut barely, and we're going to see if the boot will slide over, but I don't think it will, so I think I'm going to actually have to take this piece off. And anyway, I'm going to loosen this, drop it down, loosen this, and then I'll show you what we're going to do next to get this job done. At this point, what we've done is we've loosened the castle nut that goes right here. Now, the way we did it, of course, we had to take the cotter pin out first, and that was a difficult issue because it was frozen in. Even though we had used this product here, Aerocroil, we had soaked this stuff for a couple of days with Aerocroil, and then we did it again to try to get all that rust and corrosion loose. So we were able to knock the cotter pin out using a drift punch. Got that out. I had used an impact driver to get the 19 millimeter castle nut loose. So I used an impact driver socket, a tall one, and the impact driver, and just broke it loose that way. And then over here on this side, we put a jack to support a crescent wrench. I'm not sure really what size this backing nut is. This nut here is 27 millimeter. I have a 30 millimeter wrench and it's too big. The 27 doesn't fit here, so it's like 28 millimeters, possibly. It's kind of odd. So I just used a crescent wrench and a jack to back it so that I could get plenty of force on this, put this on, and then using a mallet, I broke this nut loose. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna kind of clean this up because we wanna keep all the relative positions the same. All we're doing is replacing this boot back here that's all ripped to pieces. So in order to do that, we actually need to take this component out, slip the boot out, slip the new one on, and then reassemble it. So we want to keep the relative position of this so that we don't have to get an alignment on the vehicle. So we're going to tape this up really, really well after we clean it so that this nut won't move. We have backed it up slightly, I mean maybe a 1/10 of a turn. Then we'll put the tire back on, lower it back down, and remove this whole assembly out, and then we'll be able to get to the boot easily and pull it off. So we'll get all that done and we'll come back. We got the outer tie rod in now loose from the lower ball joint here. And we had to use this tool. It's called an OEM 25297. We bought it at one of the auto parts stores. We had to slightly modify it. It had some casting in here. We had to grind out a little bit to get it to fit. And it took a whole ton of torque to break this loose. And so we also used a lot of Croil to get it off. So I taped the nut so it would keep its relative position. So now I can actually literally just unscrew this nice and conveniently, and we'll be able to take the boot off. Now I felt inside the boot and it's full of fluid, but it's not power steering fluid. It's brake fluid from us doing the brake lines last week. That's when we discovered that it had a problem there. And we think some of the fluid had gotten in there. So we're gonna get it all taken apart here and take a look at it. We have to clip the stainless steel clip that's on the back of the boot, and then we're gonna simply pull this one loose will pull the whole thing off, and it's going to make a big mess on the floor. So we'll be back when we get all that done, and we'll talk a little bit about it. Here's the old boot we took off, and this is the liquid that came out. So this ripped part was facing upwards, so we know what happened. Some brake fluid got in there, a little bit of water from washing the truck because we actually wash off underneath. And also the original ball was packed with grease. We think the brake fluid probably dissolved that grease and it just kind of went into the bottom of here. A couple things I wanted to mention. On our model, the clamp that goes furthest in is reusable. You just unclip it and then you can clip it back on. And of course the other clamp is also reusable. So we're going to take a new boot and put it on, but before we do that, we're going to give you a close-up shot of what it looks like on the disassembled part and how we packed it with some royal purple grease so it looks like a new one would. So if you look down there, you'll see where we packed grease into the ball. We cleaned everything up really well first, just with a clean wipe. We didn't use any solvents or anything. And then we packed it with royal purple grease really well, and now we're going to put the new boot on. So we're going to install the boot. We'll come back and show you what that looks like. Okay, the new boot is on, the clamps are on. Now we're ready to screw in the outer tie rod end, and you'll see that I kept it from going any further than what it should. So we're gonna do that. I think I'm gonna put a little bit of Loctite on it, just a teeny tiny bit, and then non-permanent, of course. And then we will start the reassembly and we'll explain that as we go along. It's been a couple of days since we started this project, and we took a couple of days off to order some parts. What we decided to do was these lower tie rod ends, we decided to go ahead and replace them, and I'll show you in a little while why we decided to do that. It has to do with the rubber boot that's on the original ones. They're almost 20 years old, and they're starting just to barely get cracks, and we decided we don't want to risk having to redo this work. Then we're going to go ahead and replace the lower ball joints, which if you own one of these vehicles, you know that's a high failure mechanism. So we have about 200,000 miles on our vehicle, and again, it's almost 20 years old. We're just going to go ahead and replace these because Toyota recommends doing it much sooner, and we're going to do it in this job. Since we already have this pulled off, it's going to be much easier to get to these and replace them. And we got all these parts on Amazon, and we'll give you the part numbers except for the 8 bolts that hold these components together. So they're Toyota part number 90080-10066, and we got these from our local Toyota dealer. Took a day to get. The bolts look like this. They come in a package. You should always replace them, and we're going to use some low strength or medium strength Loctite when we put them back in, and we'll torque them to the right spec. And when we get to all that stuff, we'll show you how to do all that. So we'll cut away at this point, and then when I come back, I'm going to show you what the tie rod that we're going to replace looks like, and I'll show you a bit of why we're going to replace it. Here's the old outer tie rod from the passenger side, and the reason we're replacing it, as you can see, there's a small rip. Now it's funny because we don't think we did this when we used the puller to pull it off, because when we used the puller we noticed just a tiny little fracture there, and we don't think it was anywhere close to where the puller was. We think this just started coming apart after we took it off, and it took the pressure off. So at any rate, it's no good. You really can't reinstall something that's ripped like this because it'll get moisture and dirt in it, and then this will become no good. So the new part comes with a new castle nut and a new cotter pin, although I think we're going to use a stainless steel cotter pin because we had a hard time getting the cotter pin out of this one because it had rusted so much from being up in New England. And so what we're going to do, it doesn't come with the nut here either. This is a 27 millimeter nut, and then on the other component here where it attaches to, that's a 28 millimeter nut, and I used a crescent wrench for that. So what we're going to do is we're going to carefully measure the length from here to the end of the nut, here to the end of the nut, and vice versa, and see if we can transfer this nut over and have it really pretty darn close. and then we'll go ahead and actually screw this part in and reattach it. And then we're going to move forward with replacing the lower ball joint, because we won't attach this part here to the lower ball joint. So we're going to get all that done, and then we'll come back and see what we're going to do next. This castle nut is what goes to the lower ball joint, and you have to pull out the cotter pin to get to it. We had to use some Aerocroil to soak it really well because it had so much rust on it from being up in New England. And so we were able to straighten out the cotter pin and then pull it out using a pair of dikes or diagonal cutters to sort of work it out to the point where we could use a small pair of water pump pliers and pull it all the way out. Now this is a 24 millimeter nut, or at least it should be. It may not be anymore because it's rusted. Yeah, it seems to fit all right. So I don't know if my impact driver is going to fit in here or not. This is put in with over 100 foot-pounds of torque. So to break it loose, we're going to have to use probably a very long breaker bar. And so you'll notice we have this lower area here jacked up on the jack, just as a safety feature. I also put a coil spring compressor on, just finger tight, just to make sure nothing bad happens, because when you take this off, this has the potential to move down a couple of inches once it breaks loose from the lower ball joint. So we don't know what will happen at this point in time as far as if we'll have to use a puller to pull it loose or what. So just to be safe, we're going to take the safe way out, and we're going to do it that way. So I'm going to remove this castle nut, and I'm actually going to loosen it, but not take it fully off quite yet. And then there's 4 bolts that go to the lower ball joint. I'll take them loose, and we'll start to work this whole system loose until we can get to the point where we can pull this whole assembly out of the way and take the lower ball joint out and replace it. Okay, if this doesn't just naturally pop loose, then you're going to have to end up using a puller on it like I have here. Ours was really frozen, and even though we used Aerocroil on it, we didn't let it soak in for a few days. So ours is frozen because of all the corrosion on this car from being up in New England, like I mentioned before. So I'm going to use this puller to take it off, and then I'll show you what we're going to do next. We were able to pop the lower ball joint loose, and this ended up not moving down, and I think it's because I had installed this just one piece of a spring compressor. I'm not trying to really compress the springs, I'm just trying to keep them from dropping too far. And so it does have some tension on it. So I do believe that kept it from popping way down, which means now this is all loose and we can work on it and take the 4 bolts out, and we're going to show you that here in a second. And I think this might actually be a helpful way of doing this. I don't know yet. I'll let you know when we're all done. This is the lower ball joint we just pulled out. We took out the 4 bolts that held it in. Actually, I have it upside down, but I don't know if you can see very well, but there's grease all here, and it's because this boot is ripped, and it's just naturally destroyed itself over time. So it's a good thing we're replacing these. It moves quite freely, so it's very loose, shouldn't be. And since the lower ball joint failure is one of the common problems on these 4Runners, it's a good thing we're going to replace it. So definitely no good. We're going to clean everything up, get the new part ready, and I'll show you how to reassemble it, including the torque specs. So here's the new part. It's going to go in something like this. You'll notice it has some spacers built in right here, some alignment bushings. And so we want to make sure everything's all cleaned up before we put it in. And so I've actually already cleaned it. And I'm going to install this, and then I'm going to show you, like I had mentioned earlier, how to put in the bolts, and I'm going to put some Loctite, either low strength or medium strength on them. Never hard strength or high strength, because you'll never get them back off. But I prefer to use low strength if I have it. We'll see what I got in my inventory. I have a lot of different Loctites. And so we'll get that going here in a second, and I'll show you how it's going. Okay, I went ahead and tightened up the 4 bolts in a crisscross pattern to 59 foot-pounds. And I did use medium strength Loctite on it. I looked, and that's what the spec is supposed to be, is medium strength Loctite. So again, crisscross pattern, 59 foot-pounds. And now I'm ready to tighten the castle nut. That's 24 millimeter nut. down here, and that gets, I think, about 105 foot-pounds. No Loctite, because you're going to put a cotter pin in it that comes with the lower ball joint. So I'm going to start tightening that up, and then we'll torque it to 105. Then you have to make sure you align the hole. So you may have to go slightly past so you can put the cotter pin through. And then I'm going to reinstall the steering component that I had taken off earlier, and then we'll start wrapping up the job. I'm ready to reinstall the new tie rod end. Remember, we're going to replace this one because it's ripped. Also, it's very loose. It moves pretty easily, and this one's so stiff I can't even move it. So, and this is marked with an R for right, same as that, so we know we have the correct one. And again, I'm going to install it in, and then I'm going to tighten this nut, which is 27 millimeters, and then I'm going to have it backed up with a 28 millimeter wrench, or in my case, a crescent wrench, so I can snug this up. This gets tightened on the castle nut to 67 foot-pounds of torque, and then of course you're going to have to turn it so it's located such that you can put a cotter pin through one of the holes. There's a hole going this way and one going that way, so should be no problem. We're going to get all that done, and then we'll come back, take a look at it, and we'll put the tire back on and take it off the jacks, and then we'll do the other side. Lovely. So I'm going to just go over a review real quick what we did on this video. We replaced the steering rack boot. We replaced this component here, which is the outer tie rod. And then we replaced the lower ball joint. Everything's torqued up. These are tightened up. Everything's all ready to go back together. We're going to put the wheel on, and then we're finished. So that's really all there is to this video. Be sure and work safe. Make sure you have plenty of jacks and jack stands and all sorts of safety things, and wear your safety glasses to keep yourself from having any issues. And hope to see you on another video soon. Until then, tschüss.